Keeping a planted tank is one of the most satisfying and rewarding hobbies out there, but it can be a little tricky, and when things go wrong, it's so frustrating. Follow along in today's video. I'm going to show you 10 of the biggest mistakes that I see from my clients. What up, fish friends? Hope you're having a great day. My name is Michael. I own an aquarium cleaning company. We specialize in planted tanks, and that's where I'm getting the idea for today's video. These are mistakes that I see over and over again with new clients. I help them overcome them so that they can get the most out of their tanks. Hopefully you find this video useful today as well. So the first thing we got to talk about is light. Light is absolutely the most important thing when it comes to plants, and the type of light that you pick is super important. You can get everything else wrong when it comes to plants, but as long as you have the right light, then you'll at least get some growth. If you get everything else right about plants but don't have the right light, then nothing will work. When you're looking for a light, the easiest way to find a good light for your planted tank is just to look at Kelvin. So Kelvin is a measure of the color of light, and while it's not like the absolute most scientific way to go about finding a good light for your tank, it's pretty easy and it generally works. So what you should look for is a light in the 6,500 to 7,500 Kelvin range. All that means is we're looking at a light where the color is close to the color that the sun puts out. It's a full spectrum light, meaning it has all the colors of the rainbow that kind of combine to make a strong white light that plants can use to photosynthesize. If we were to shine a blue light on them, or a red light, or a green light, then the plants wouldn't get all of the various wavelengths that they need in order to grow. You don't have to go and buy the most expensive light out there to get the best results. When it comes to lights for your planted tank, sometimes getting a cheaper light is actually the best option. So these days you can hop on Amazon and find a light for a small tank for around 15 bucks. Anyways, lighting can be a really complicated topic if you want it to be. If you want to learn more about lights and look at wavelengths and stuff, check out a video. I left a link in the description all about planted lights. If you want to keep things simple, just go and buy a 6,500 Kelvin light. If you get the wrong type of light, then what's likely to happen is your plants aren't going to be able to utilize it because your plants are weak and susceptible. They're not getting the light they need. There's all this unused light in the tank. Algae decides, I'm going to not only use all this light, but I'm going to smother your plants. And then it's kind of a cycle where your plants are dying and the algae take over. The wrong type of light can completely ruin your tank. So really make sure you get the right one. All right, topic number 2, closely related to the first one. It's not about what type of light you use, but how much. If you blast your tank with light, same thing is going to happen. You're going to get a ton of algae in there. And this is something that I see a lot. I think people want their plants to grow faster and stronger and healthier. And they think, oh, if I blast this tank with light, then the plants are going to go bonkers. Well, it's not only algae that we have to worry about, but some plants actually have a lower light intensity demand. So plants like Java fern and Anubias and many types of mosses prefer a low intensity of light. If you blast them with light and don't provide them with some other things like nutrition and CO2, you can really fry them. Another thing to consider when we're talking about amount of light is the duration that we keep lights on. I like to keep lights on between 8 and 10 hours a day in your planted tank. Something else that I see a lot of noobs do is they put light on all day and night because they want their plants to grow more, better and stronger. But truth of the matter is, plants have evolved to grow or photosynthesize to use sunlight for only X amount of hours a day. And that's anywhere between, I don't know, maybe like 10 and 14 hours a day. If you blast them with more light than that, you're essentially depriving them of sleep. They have different cycles that they go through, and it's important to give them dark periods so that they can do the other things that they need to do. Set your lights to 8 hours a day. You can experiment with a little longer if you want, but if you start to see algae, then dial it back a bit. Substrate's a very important topic when it comes to growing plants. If you think about plants outside, you generally see the healthiest plants growing in the best soils. You don't generally see plants growing directly out of rocks or concrete, although there are super hardy plants that can do this. The majority of plants benefit from having good soil. And it's the same thing in our planted tank. There are so many different types of substrates. Gravel tends to be the most traditional type, like back when I was a kid, that's all you saw in tanks. There's sand. Nowadays, there is something called aqua soil, which is a product produced just for aquarium plants. This product is so perfect in my opinion. It's basically clay or volcanic minerals that are compacted into these tiny little pellets, and then they're baked in the oven, enriched with nutrients. And the baking process is important because when you throw it in the tank, it doesn't just cloud up like crazy. Something else you can do is go and dig up some dirt from outside and stick it along the bottom of your tank and then cap it with sand. That's also going to be an adequate substrate type, and plants will grow just fine in there. Another option is there are some plants that do well in sand. So along the side of this tank, I have some pygmy chainsword, Hylanthemum tenellum. That stuff grows really well in sand. I don't even have root tabs down there. They just grow like crazy. Thousandaria, sage, those are a couple other plants that grow fairly well in sand. However, at the end of the day, these plants do grow far better in a soil substrate. So strongly consider that if you're setting up a new planted tank. Constantly changing things, moving plants around, tinkering, putzing, this is not good for your tank. This is such a common mistake. I see people that don't get the results right away and then think, oh, I'm going to move this plant over there. It needs more light or it needs less light. And while I will say it is a good idea to do this in the beginning when you're setting your tank up, I will give you a 2-week window to figure out where things should go. After that point, you really need to let things sit. Plants grow really, really lush once they're established. If you don't give them time to establish, they're never going to look good. And they can recover from 2 or 3 moves, but if you constantly move them, you run the risk of actually killing them. The same could be said for fish. You don't want to constantly be moving fish from one tank to another, to another, to another. You want to give them time to settle into their home. Sounds a little bit crazy to be talking about plants this way, but plants really do acclimate to the tank they're in and the location. Moving them just means they have to refigure things out. The 5th thing is water changes, and this can go either way. I see some people do way too many water changes or virtually no water changes at all. Naturally, this depends on the tank you have, how many water changes you need to do. If you set up an ecosystem tank, then technically you don't have to do water changes at all. You should probably be shooting for a water change once every 2 to 4 weeks, maybe somewhere between 25 and 50% of the water volume. Naturally, how often and how much of the water you change depends on the bioload in your tank. So the absolute best way to figure out when it's time for a water change is to test your water. If you're getting nitrates higher than 30 parts per million, 40 parts per million maybe, then it's time for a water change. If your tank is able to absorb all those nutrients because the plants are growing and you're never getting nitrates higher than 5 or 10 parts per million, then you got yourself an ecosystem tank and you probably don't need to do water changes at all. Granted, there are some occasions where it is a good time to go in and do a water change, even if there's low nitrates. We might be seeing algae on the glass and we scrub it and it's in the water column and then we want to drain it down. Or we could see detritus build up along the front of the glass and it doesn't look good. Water changes aren't always about the health of your fish. Sometimes it's about keeping a tank looking good, right? And that's really important. If the tank doesn't look good, you're not going to enjoy watching it, and the hobby's going to get kind of stale for you. So a little bit of maintenance can go a long way towards keeping you happier and more engaged. Now, I do see people kind of cross the line sometimes and they think, oh, I've got algae in my tank, I need to scrub it and do a water change every day. Well, if you're doing that many water changes and cleanings and stuff, and the algae is still there, chances are that the algae is not a result of your lack of maintenance. It's probably a result of too much light. So consider why you're doing so many water changes. Look at your water quality, think about your lighting, think about some other factors before you dive into repetitive water changes. Plants need nutrients to grow. I think everyone knows this, but sometimes people don't make that connection when it comes to the planted tank. You know, I talked earlier about the right type of soil. Plants don't grow in rocks. People outside in their gardens constantly fertilize, add nutrients, amend the soil. It's the same concept for your plants. If you've had a tank set up for a year, then the soil could be partially depleted. So you should go through and stick some root tabs down in there. It's a really easy and affordable process. There's tons of companies that make root tabs. Personally, I like the Seachem root tabs because they don't have that plastic coating, you know, like a pill that you'd swallow. It's just a kind of funky smelling tablet that you stick in the soil. The ones with the coating sometimes want to float, and when you stick them down, they start to melt or get wet a bit, and then they're sticky and they stick to your tweezers, which you're sticking them down in, and then they float up to the top and release all the nutrients in the soil. So I really do prefer the kind of like no coating root tabs. Another way that you can provide your plants with nutrients is through the water column. So fish naturally go to the bathroom, they excrete ammonia through their gills, and that provides nutrients to your plants. But sometimes you have so many plants in your tank that they absorb more nutrients than your fish are putting out. One good workaround for this is you can use liquid fertilizer. Liquid fertilizer is super easy. You just take a bottle of it and pumps them in the tank, not hard at all. If you're like me and you forget to fertilize a lot, you can buy an auto doser. They're fairly affordable and easy to set up, maybe around 50 or 60 bucks, 10-minute setup time, and they'll pump the right amount of fertilizer into your tank every day. You can set the exact amount and time that it releases into your tank. One advantage of using liquid fertilizers over just relying on your fish for waste is that fish produce a lot of macronutrients as a waste product. Plants use macronutrients as like the building blocks, you know, the stuff that they actually stack on top of each other to create like the physical material of the plants. So this will allow really fast plant growth, but plants also need micronutrients, and fish waste is kind of devoid of micronutrients. Micronutrients are the kind of things that are important for internal processes within plants. Number 7 is buying the right types of plants for your setup. This is something that people don't talk about enough, in my opinion, but there are varying levels of hardness when it comes to growing plants. One of the best places to get information on if a plant is easy or challenging to grow and what exactly it needs, right? We're talking CO2, fertilizers, heavy lighting or weak lighting, you know, all of these things are listed on this company called Tropica's website. Tropica sells plants. Their spokesperson, George Farmer, is one of my favorite fish keepers out there, but he's super knowledgeable, and this company is very, very detail oriented. They have a cool inventory of plants online, and they list out all the demands for plants. So if you're struggling to find, you know, the right type of plants for your tank, you want to keep things easy and low tech, then just hop on Tropica, find a bunch of easy plants and purchase those. Maintenance is very important, and I know in the beginning I said I wasn't going to talk a ton about maintenance, but I do think we need to at least talk about trimming your plants. If you don't trim your plants properly, then what's likely to happen is your fastest growing plant is going to take over the tank. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on trimming, beyond saying that it's important. If you want to learn more about how to trim plants, then check out my video on trimming. CO2 is something that I think a lot of people are miseducated on in the hobby. There seems to be kind of a divide between like low tech and high tech aquarium fans. What I think is the most important thing is that people understand the science behind their choices. So I'm going to tell you CO2 is absolutely essential for plant growth. We talked about photosynthesis earlier. Plants take sunlight and then they use a little bit of nutrients and water, and then they create sugars. Sugars are what plants use to grow. So naturally, the more photosynthesis a plant can undergo, the faster and healthier it will grow. Part of that photosynthesis is CO2. So whether or not we inject it into the tank, CO2 does end up in the water. It can either dissolve from the top or be spit out through the fish's gills or through some bacteria that live in the substrate. CO2 is in our tanks. If we want to really absolutely boost our plant growth, give them roids for like an unfair advantage, CO2 will make your plants grow like crazy. I've seen a lot of planted tanks over the years, and I've come to the conclusion that CO2 is actually the limiting factor for growth in the majority of people's tanks. Because people have the right amount of light and the right amount of nutrition, their plants can grow to some degree. But as soon as they finish using the CO2 in the tank, they stop growing. So they're not even able to utilize the light and nutrients in the water column. What we need to do to unlock that full potential is to inject CO2 in the tank. And it doesn't have to be a crazy expensive setup. You can set up a little DIY rig. If you're happy with where your plants are at and you don't want them to grow any faster, then that's fine. You don't actually need to inject CO2 in your tank. Your plants can get it from those other sources I told you about. All right, number 10, last but not least on this list, is talking about perfection. There is no such thing as a perfect planted tank. This tank looks pretty good today, but I actually spent a lot of time yesterday pulling out algae from this tank. So take it with a grain of salt. You know, I'm not ready to rip this tank down. I'm going to make some of the changes that I talked about today. Because there is continually algae buildup in this tank, I'm going to switch out these super expensive lights for some cheaper, lower intensity ones, and I'm going to grow easy plants in here. I'm getting rid of the hard plants and letting the easy plants grow up to the top and just kind of shade everything else out, providing a lower intensity setup. What does perfect mean anyways? Like, the most important thing about your tank is that your fish are healthy and that you're enjoying it. Is a little bit of algae here and there really gonna turn your tank off? I don't think so. It's completely fine to have a bit of algae in there. Just kind of set some standards for yourself. Try and live up to that as much as you can, and don't worry about what other people say. As long as you like your tank, it's perfect. If there's something that I forgot to bring up today, like some issues that a lot of people struggle with that I just didn't cross my mind, drop a comment and let me know, and I can address that in a future video. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider supporting my channel by watching some other videos or even buying something through an affiliate link. That's a great way to financially support this channel. Appreciate it. Until next time, see ya.